This episode is all about European Foulbrood. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on this important pathogen. Then I'm going to talk about diagnosing it in the field and follow that up with how to prevent it and treat it if it occurs in your apiary. But first things first, background information. European Foulbrood is a condition caused by the bacterium Melissococcus plutonius. Young larvae are infected with this particular bacterium when they eat contaminated food. So when they eat this contaminated food as young larvae, it goes into their midguts and multiplies in their midguts. And what happens in the midguts is it outcompetes the larvae for nutrition that the larvae are taking into their bodies. And so what you'll see is as these larvae age, they start to appear sick. I'll talk about that in a moment with this field diagnosis part. But once they get sick, they're not going to recover from that as individual larvae. They will ultimately die either in the latter larval stages or sometimes even as capped individuals. And at that point, the bees may remove them from the hives, or they may continue to suffer if there's enough of these individual larvae in the nest, and that would facilitate the spread of disease. So it's a really particularly bad disease, and it's in the name, European Foulbrood. The fact that it says European on the front doesn't mean it comes from Europe. It was just first identified there. But the fact that the second part of the name is Foulbrood means that it occurs in the brood, and one of the signs, the clinical signs that it can present, is a foul odor. So let's talk about the diagnosis of this particular issue. So like the name it says, it's a Foulbrood. So all of the things that you'll be looking for will be occurring in the brood stages of development of honeybees. So it infects the larvae. I've mentioned that. So really that's the first individual in the honeybee colony that you will notice having an impact for European Foulbrood. It's important to remind you about a few things related to healthy brood, because you're really going to have that picture in your brain so that you can compare what you are seeing to what it should be. And if you remember, when a queen lays an egg, she lays an egg in the back of that cell. Out of that egg will come a young larvae that lies in the back of that cell in the shape of the letter C, C-shaped larvae. And that larvae is plump, and it's white, and it's shiny. And as it develops, it will grow to fill that cell. It will pivot around in the cell, eating the brood food placed in front of it. But the key here is it's plump, C-shaped, shiny, and white. European Foulbrood causes larvae to have the opposite of all of those conditions. First, they will not always be lying in the back of the cell in the shape of the letter C. They may twist in that cell when they shouldn't otherwise be twisted. They start to discolor. You can get yellow or brown or orange or even gray colored larvae. That's a clear sign that they are dying or are dead and in the process of decaying. Another peculiarity that you get with European Foulbrood is the body of the larvae can become very transparent, and the tracheal system in that larvae almost highlighted. So you can often see the tracheal system branching through these diseased larvae. Another thing associated with it is you can get that smell. That's where the name Foulbrood comes from, but that's not particularly diagnostic, because when you have brood rotting, it can be caused by lots of different things. But you do get a smell associated with some of the more infected stages if you have colonies that are heavily infected. As that larvae progresses to age, it can start to die, or in the decay process, start to fall to the bottom of the cell where it will be just a molten mass. Remember I said earlier, healthy larvae are big and plump and white and C-shaped. Well, if they lose that internal pressure, their bodies become flaccid or almost molten as they fall to the bottom of that cell. At this point, it can actually form a scale. Now, this is a very tricky thing to discuss, because American Foulbrood, the cousin of European Foulbrood, also causes immature bees to die that form a scale. The key difference, though, is that the European Foulbrood scale, that larvae that's died and molted to the bottom of the cell, it's easily removable from that cell, mostly intact, whereas the American Foulbrood scale hardens and dries and sticks to the bottom of that cell and is difficult to remove. So in the case of European Foulbrood, you can get this scale. You can also try the rope test. And again, the rope test is best known with American Foulbrood, where when you think you have an infected individual, you take a small matchstick or a twig and stick it into that cell, stir up the cell contents, and pull it out. Well, American Foulbrood will have a long, ropey, and I hate to use this word, but almost snotty, stringy ropiness that comes out of that cell. Whereas European Foulbrood doesn't do that, or it doesn't rope further than, about 1/2 centimeter. So it's not really a significant sign of infections. And with lots and lots of larvae dying in their cells and bees removing those infected individuals from those cells, you can get significantly spotty brood patterns. Now, I want to mention, I keep talking about larvae and larvae and larvae, but you can get individuals die actually in the capped stage, where the bee will put a capping over that cell, and then that cell capping might tend to sink a little bit and get perforations in it. However, generally speaking, more individuals will die in that open larval stage than what you get with this cap stage. So if I see something affecting larvae, my mind first goes to European Foulbrood. Now, I need to say a few things before we move on to preventing and treating this particular disease. European Foulbrood can be a very tricky thing for a lot of beekeepers to diagnose in their colonies, and that's because it looks like other problems as well. For example, it can look very similar to American Foulbrood. I'll talk about that a lot more in another video. In this particular case, though, there are two other things that people often confuse it for. That's chalk brood disease, or parasitic mite syndrome that is associated with high varroa infestation. So one of the key diagnostics when you're in the colony is to rule out American Foulbrood and the clinical signs that it presents, rule out chalk brood and the clinical signs it presents, do a varroa wash and make sure your varroa populations aren't really high, which could lead you to rule out varroa as a potential cause and help you narrow it down to European Foulbrood. So all of those are field level diagnostics that you can use. There are also little tools that you can use called lateral flow devices that you can purchase from beekeeping equipment supply companies. These work on the same principle that pregnancy tests work. You will collect, in this case, an individual you believe to be infected. You will follow the manufacturer's instructions for using this device, but it usually involves putting the individual in a jar and shaking it with some liquid. You take that liquid and put it on the lateral flow device, and as that liquid moves through, you'll get banding patterns on the device that tell you if the sample's positive or negative for European Foulbrood. So I strongly recommend that people have these with them in their apiary kits so that if you ever see something you believe to be European Foulbrood, that you can then do something to address it. You'll have that lateral flow device to help you get a better diagnostic. And really the final diagnostic that you can use is if you think you have infected individuals, you can contact one of your national or local or maybe even an international diagnostic lab that will provide diagnostic services for you. And that will usually involve following some sort of prescription from the company that will tell you to collect this, put it in this, mail it to us at this address, and then they will perform standard laboratory techniques to identify European Foulbrood in your colonies. If you have positive confirmation that you have European Foulbrood in your colonies, there's a few things that you can do. But I want first to tell you how hopefully not to get European Foulbrood in your colonies, and I'll talk a bit about that through prevention, and then assuming you find it, I'll follow that up with treatment. So how can you prevent the disease in the first place? Well, start with brand new equipment. When you move bees into brand new equipment, you lessen the chance that they are taking with them these European Foulbrood bacterium that will cause this particular problem in your hive. Secondly, use some sort of hygienic stock. Now, honeybees have not really been bred for resistance to European Foulbrood, but the way that workers deal with the infected individuals in the comb is they will remove the brood from their cells and abort it out of the hive. That's just hygienic behavior. It's the same behavior they use for American Foulbrood and chalk brood and varroa and all these other brood infecting pests and disease. So starting with a hygienic stock on new equipment is a really, really good idea. Furthermore, you can use very good sanitation practices. For example, before going to the next apiary, you can wash your gloves, you can sanitize your hive tool or sanitize your smoker so that you're not moving the pathogen between apiaries. But in my experience doing some disease and pest screens around Florida, I see European Foulbrood in lots and lots and lots of samples, especially even from colonies that aren't showing signs of the infection. So it's a very common disease waiting in stressed colonies to manifest. So assuming that your preventative techniques don't work and you see something in your colonies that looks like European Foulbrood and you diagnose it positively as European Foulbrood, then what can you do? Well, harken back to what I said about the hygienic stock from a prevention standpoint. If your colony has European Foulbrood, clearly your bees aren't very good at handling it before they get there, right? So I would always suggest as a possible option to requeen the colony and hopefully get in a stock whose offspring, the workers, can remove appropriately these infected individuals. You can also perform what we call a shook swarm method. The idea here is that you are moving the bees from the contaminated combs and the contaminated equipment to new combs and new equipment. And that's literally just putting a brand new box with brand new combs, maybe even frames of foundation or brand new pulled combs. You move the bees, the queens, the workers, the drones, everybody, all the adults from the contaminated hive, and you shake them into the hive that's not contaminated. You're shaking a swarm, the shook swarm method. You can also go into that colony and remove the brood combs from that colony. If you don't want to shake them to a new box, you can remove those brood combs, you can throw those away, and you can replace them with frames of foundation or pulled combs from sources that you know to be European Foulbrood free. Another thing that you can do in your colonies in the field, if you believe you have European Foulbrood in a particular colony, is you can go to a colony that's otherwise strong and healthy, that has lots of capped brood, lots of bees, etc., and you can move frames of bees and brood over to this European Foulbrood infested colony, really in an effort to get those bees to come out and be healthy and clean up the mess that's in that hive. Maybe you just need to augment the population and that will be enough to help them get over the edge. But you really want to make sure if you do bring bees and brood over to this infected colony that you don't take frames of the infected colony back to the colony from which you removed the frames of bees and brood. So be careful with regard to swapping frames in the apiary between healthy and diseased colonies. In my experience with European Foulbrood, colonies are often able to overcome it in good nectar flows and when colonies' other diseases and pests are otherwise controlled. So one of the things I think about when I see European Foulbrood is maybe I should feed these colonies. I can feed my way out of it. One of the interesting things about European Foulbrood is that it often recovers on its own. I personally have never seen colonies taken out by European Foulbrood. I see them get significantly stressed due to European Foulbrood, but through some management, maybe feeding, maybe requeening, maybe doing some of these other practices I've mentioned so far, colonies can often recover. And when that happens, you wouldn't have to do anything at all. But I will tell you that when you see it the first time, it's going to be very concerning and you're going to worry significantly, which leads me to kind of a final treatment option. And that final treatment option is through the use of antibiotics. Now, I know these videos are being watched all around the world. Some of you listening to me right now may not have legal access to antibiotics that you can put in your colonies. Here in the U.S., beekeepers are allowed to treat colonies after the colonies have the disease using certain antibiotics. So the point that I'm making here is that it is possible in some parts around the world, if you see the disease, to treat colonies with antibiotics to help them out of that problem. But I will tell you, again, that's not the same case everywhere. And I will make another point here. Every country is very different on how they handle colony infection with European Foulbrood. Here in the U.S., we can keep those colonies moving forward. But I have heard from individuals from other countries around the world where European Foulbrood is considered in some places a notifiable disease and they have to burn the colonies in an effort to get rid of it. So beyond everything I've said, the most important thing that you need to do if you suspect you have European Foulbrood in your colonies is to follow local laws and local ordinances associated with the disease. Assuming they allow you to keep that colony alive and treat to do something, then you need to follow your local rules and recommendations. I've given you some that are typical here in the U.S., but I hope that you are able to manage your colony such that you never get European Foulbrood in the first place, but if you do get it, you now have some tools that you can use to bring your colonies through healthy to the other side of this infection.